Good afternoon. My name is Jagdeep Aluwalia. I am the founding secretary of the Indo-American Chamber of Commerce of Greater Houston, which I currently serve as executive director. Today's webinar will be recorded and forwarded to all participants, and we will load it to the Chamber website at iaccgh.com. The Chamber President, Tarush Anand, and I would like to thank our board members, our directors at large, and our advisors for their support of all the activity that the Chamber continues to do for us. We would also like to thank Swapan Dhairyawan, past president of the Chamber, for organizing and moderating today's event, and Mahesh Desai for participating, and Rimple Mushrawala, CPA, for sponsoring today's event. Thank you very much for this distinguished panel that will be sharing their expertise. This event is in a series of PPP-related events, and many of you may have already received your funding. Today was the last day to submit your request, your application for PPP funding against the existing program. But today's event is very important because to be able to get your loan waived, you have to make sure you follow certain processes, submit certain documents, and that is what our distinguished panel will be talking about today. I would like to make a disclaimer on behalf of the Chamber that all information provided on these webinars is for informational purpose only. We strongly suggest you visit your CPA, if you have one, or one of these three CPAs who are very good professionals, to understand what you need to do to get the forgiveness under the PPP program so that you're not stuck a couple of years later with a loan that you were expecting would be forgiven because you did not take the right guidance, you did not submit the right documents. The way I sum it up is I don't try to treat myself. I go to a doctor if I need medical advice. So for financial advice, I always recommend using a CPA. I want to thank Seva International and Gitesh Desai, one of our partners, of several partners, for putting a live feed through their Facebook account so a broader cross-section of the community can benefit from today's webinar. With that, I want to now introduce the president of the Chamber, the chairman of our board, Tarush Anand, who will make welcome remarks on behalf of the Chamber and introduce Swapan Dhairyawan, who will then take over the rest of the program. I will be back at the end to wrap up and thank everybody. The Chamber President and Chairman of our board, Tarush Anand, is an attorney by profession. He is a partner at the law firm of Brown Sims, where he practices civil litigation. He has represented a broad range of domestic and international businesses in various types of business disputes across the country. He has received several awards and honors over the years, including an AV preeminent rating from Martindale-Hubbell and selection to the Texas Super Lawyers Rising Stars list for several years. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to hand over to Tarush Anand, the president of the Indo-American Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you, Jagdeep. Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webinar in our ongoing COVID-19 webinar series. As those of you who've been following us for the past few months probably know, the situation with COVID has forced us to change gears and turn to online networking and online content sharing as the COVID challenges have prevented in-person events. Who knew 3 months ago that at the end of June, this was going to be looking like the new normal for many more months to come. COVID-19 obviously has created havoc for many businesses, but has also created opportunities for others. And our goal as the board of the Chamber of Commerce has been to provide as much information and value to our members to help them face the challenges that are presented by COVID, and also where possible, take opportunity of the opportunities that exist or take advantage of the opportunities that exist. We've had prior events involving PPP and tax-related issues, which of course are critical in these times to businesses and business owners. And we're very pleased to have today's event as well as a follow-up to some of the prior events we've had on the PPP loans. I would say today is probably the most important one in that if you've received the money now, how do you make sure you keep it? I, for one, certainly want to know about that. So with that, let me turn to introducing our moderator for today, Swapan Theriawan. I don't think he's a man who needs much introduction, but that's my role today, so let me try and do my best with it. Swapan Theriawan is a practicing CPA and the founder of a full-service accounting and tax firm called MD & Associates. He founded that firm 15 plus years ago. He obtained his master's in accounting from Bombay University and also has a CMA designation. And his firm specializes in small and mid-sized businesses from a wide range of sectors and services. I probably don't need to tell you this, but Swapan has a strong involvement in the community. You may know him as the past president of the Chamber of Commerce, where he did such a great job that the board had the idea that we probably need to keep our presidents on for a 2-year term. And so he was the first 2-year term president for the Chamber of Commerce. He's been a past president of the ICC, India Cultural Center, and he's involved in so many other organizations that we'd spend the whole afternoon discussing them before I started listing them all. His community service has been so great that the Houston CPA Society recently awarded him a Distinguished Public Service Award just this year. So it's our privilege to have Swapan Theriawan on our board. We've been privileged to have him as our past president, and we are honored to have him moderate this session. So with that, let me turn things over to Swapan Theriawan.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all the kind words, and you made my day, of course. Thank you to the Chamber Board, all the directors at large, and of course, the advisors as well, who keep us doing the good job for the last 20 plus years. Good afternoon to you, everyone. Today's panel is about PPP, that is the Payroll Protection Program. And this panel is going to talk about the forgiveness program, the new rules that came up. So we will be opening up the presentation, of course, but before that, I would just like most of our audience to have your questions as well. Put that out on the question and answer box if you have anything. We will be answering most of the questions at the end of the session. I will be jumping in and out if there is a need and there's a question which is specific to the panelist. With that, I will be first introducing Mahesh Bhai, of course. Mahesh Bhai has been a Houstonian for the last 25 plus years. He is a great CPA, good friend of ours, and always been there with us for every event, every tax seminar that we have done together. And of course, he has been involved in the community as well and giving back to the community, to the Lewa Patidar Samaj and all of the organizations that he's involved with. With that, I would like to ask Mahesh Bhai to come up and do his presentation about, of course, the PPP, the big thing which happened just after the CARES Act, in which we had the 2 phases. The first phase was 349 billion, and the second phase was 310 billion, which came up for the small businesses, mid-sized businesses, and the non-profit organizations. And today being the last date, he might have some tips about that. So with that, Mahesh Bhai, you can get started.
Thank you, Swapan, for the kind introductions, and thank you, Jagdeep. Thank you, Tarush and Rimple, and of course, Pauna, who helped us to put together this program. Welcome to the listeners, and I would like to tell you that I'm going to go over the steps in overall big bird's eye view, and then Rimple will go through in detail in the examples. So my presentation will cover the procedures, and Rimple will go more into details. Let's start with the first page, Rimple. Loan forgiveness and the PPP Flexibility Act. The loan forgiveness was passed when this program was announced, and then there were issues with the program. So the government came out with a flexibility. They put some flexibility into the program, and here are the basic points for the flexibility. The 8-week period has gone to now extended to 24 weeks. So you have to spend the money in prior to that, prior to flexibility, it was 8 weeks. Now it is 24 weeks. So you have a time to spend the money if you got the PPP loan. Next one is a 75% to 60% reduction in the payroll. And then the third one is the full-time equivalent employee that were reduced, that were required to be maintained and you could not maintain because of whatever reasons. And now they have given a safe harbor. The next one is the maturity of loan. If the loan is not approved or the loan is not forgiven, then you have to pay back the loan, but they have given 5 years to pay back the loan. But let's hope that if we follow this process, then we don't have to have a situations where we have to return the money and all the loans is forgiven. The next one is the 5-year period will start from the time the determination is made that the loan is not forgiven. And the last important point is the payroll tax for the deposit. You still have a time. If you cannot pay this year, the employer portion of payroll by December 2020, then you have until 2021 to pay half of that and remaining half until 2022. So next one. FTE reduction. So in order to get the forgiveness, you have to spend the money as well as you have to maintain the employment. So if you are reducing the employment and if you have reduced the employment and then you cannot bring it back up to the same level of employment, then you are going to have an issue. However, government has provided some safe harbor in terms of not being able to reach to the same level of employment. And the exceptions are that if you cannot hire somebody because he was fired for cause or he voluntarily resigned, or you are unable to hire, then government will not count that against you. And that is called a safe harbor in the sense that even if those situations exist and if you document, then the reduction will not go against you and you will get a forgiveness. So that is basically the flexibility is built in to survive you as a business and keep you continuing. And so that's a great flexibility and that is government provided. So next one. Now the calculation of full-time equivalent employee is a very important calculations. If you maintain the employee and if you do not reduce their payroll, then you should be able to get the forgiveness. Now, in order to do that calculations, government gave the definition of the full-time equivalent calculations because many small businesses do not have a full-time 40 hours of employment. So there may be a situation in restaurant or in some other businesses where some employee comes 20 hours, some come 30 hours. So depending on the situations, you may have a situations where you have to count how many full-time equivalent employee were there. And so the basic formula is that you would take the average number of employee, divide by 40 and round to the total of the nearest 10th. However, the government also came out with a simplified calculation. So next page, please. So this is the full-time equivalent forgiveness calculation and government made it very simple. So if somebody works for 40 hours, you count him as a 1. If somebody works for more than 40 hours, you still count him as a 1. However, if somebody works for less than 40 hours, whether he works for 10 hours, 20 hours, or 30 hours, you can still count him as a half employee. And so it's very simple. Instead of, for example, in this case, in employee number 5 is working for 10 hours. So instead of counting as a 0.25, you can count him as a half employee. I mean, he's working half at the time. And so the calculation is simple, and that way you can maintain, you can do the full-time equivalent calculations and move on to complete your application. Next page. Next one. Yeah. Now the eligible costs, what is covered, what you can spend money on from the loan that you got. It's basically the payroll up to 24 weeks if you elect the alternate time period, and a maximum 100,000 per employee. You can count only once paid or accrued. If you paid once, if you paid some employee and then you also paying it, accruing it for the next quarter, then you just don't count it twice, you just count once. And then the non-payroll cost is pretty much simple: mortgage interest, not the principal, rent, lease payment on the office or a store or the warehouse or whatever you have, and then the utility payment like gas, water, internet, telephone. You can document those things, submit these expenses and say, hey, 40% I spent on the non-payroll, 60% on payroll, and you should be able to spend this money on the approved item. Next one.
So
Now-
Mahesh Bhai,
Yes, sir.
there was a subsequent question based on the FTEs that you are talking about, which is basically full-time equivalents. So there is this retail store which has used to have full-time employees, but because of loss of traffic, because of no sales, not much, they had to convert their full-time employees to part-time employees. So how will they be able to use the safe harbor method, and will that affect their loan forgiveness? That is one of the questions which has popped up. Maybe you just talked about FT, so I'm posing it to you, but I'm sure Rimple will be covering that also when she covers her example or the illustration. So if you want to put some light, shed some light.
Yeah, so if you are hiring some, because the business traffic has gone down, and if you are hiring that employee as the employee was full-time before, now you reduce the hours and you are putting him as a part-time employee, then you use that formula and then you go on. And also you have to look into the reduction in the payroll. Now the reduction in the payroll based on the number of hours can be there, but if there is no more than 25% reduction, then it's not going to be counted. So it's going to be counted as a safe harbor, and it will not adversely affect the borrower for the loan forgiveness. So let's go over to the forgiveness application process. It's a 5-page application. It looks simple, but you have to make sure that you complete the application correctly and don't miss out any information. Otherwise, the whole process can get delayed, and you may risk your forgiveness you may risk it, and it may become a jeopardy in the sense if they don't approve it. So make sure you do the proper calculations. If you are self-employed, or if you did not have any reduction in the wages or headcount, then you can complete the simple application 3508 easy, and it will allow you to submit the 3508 easy applications. Next one. Next, please. Yeah, so sorry, go back, the documentation. Yeah, you have to maintain submit the documentation 941 form, TWC report, the bank statement, payroll report from ADP Paychecks, wherever you are getting your payroll services done. And then you have to do the full-time equivalent employee calculations. And for the non-payroll costs, basically it's a amortization schedule. They may ask you for the note or the cancel check for the lender's payment of the interest and mortgage payment, the lease agreement, and the invoices for utility paid. Now, make sure that you retain this document for 6 years, because the lender job is to approve it. But then if there is a examination of your loan and audit of the loan, then you will be able to comfortably support if you have all the documents. And there have been some cases where people obtain fraudulent loans. So the government is training the IRS agent and the SBA people to go through and check if there is any issues in fraudulent loan. So make sure that the documents are retained properly. Next one.
So one
Yeah.
thing over here, Mahesh Bhai,
Mhm.
the two forms that you mentioned were, which was the easy form, the form number 3508 easy, that is most likely used only for the self-employed employees or for whom they have no change of headcount, correct?
Yes.
Reiterate that. Okay. And the long form, which is the 3508, which is almost 5 page, it has some worksheets and all those things on the basis of which there is a forgiveness criteria which will be determined.
Yes, so the Schedule A worksheet and another worksheet for the higher paid employee, those worksheets are going to be examining whether you really paid the employee the wages, and there is a social security number of the employee that you need to put in the cash compensation and the calculation. So the Schedule A worksheet most likely is going to be examined or match with the payroll report that you file for the last quarter, or whenever you submit your application, say preceding quarter. So government will verify the payroll payment, because essentially the loan, this whole program was for the payroll protection and maintaining the employee on the payroll. So the government gave the money to the employer to support this, and so they want to make sure that the money were spent. Next one. Yeah, this Schedule A worksheet is for an employee whose compensation was more than 100,000, and you limit that for limit the coverage up to 100,000. So these are the two worksheet that you need to complete. Next one. So now let's look at the most important thing. You have the documentation, you have completed the process, you have completed the forms, you got the money, you spend the money, you put together all your records, all your information, and uh, complete the application to your lender. So you don't have to submit to the bank, you have to submit it to your lender from where you got the money, and the lender will look into it, and lender has about 60 days to work and submit for the approval. Once the SBA approves this, then SBA will send the money to the bank, and bank will notify you. However, if you got the EIDL money, emergency loan or emergency grant, economic injury disaster loan or disaster grant, whatever they call, sometimes they are changing the wording into it. So that amount is going to be reduced from the PPP. So let's say you have a 5 employee and you got $1,000 per each employee, $5,000, and you also got $25,000 of PPP loan. The $5,000 that you first got, they will be reduced from the PPP calculations. So that is what the basically steps is. If the SBA determines that you are not eligible and there is no forgiveness, then the clock to repay starts, and that is when you have to start repaying, and that's going to be a bad news for the borrower. However, we want to make sure that most of the people will get forgiveness if there is a flexibility built in, and if there is no fraud or any other misrepresentation, then you should be able to get the forgiveness. Once that process is done, then the money is yours. You don't have to pay it back, and your life goes on. So next one. So these are the 3 or 4 questions that we have received many times from the people. They ask, can I switch from 8 weeks to 24 weeks because my business was not open, or because I was shut down because of the government mandate? And the answer is yes, you can do so. If you request a lender, they will allow you to switch from 8 to 24 weeks, and that should not be an issue. And then when can I apply for forgiveness? So the answer is, as soon as you have spent the money, you can apply for forgiveness. You don't have to wait it until the 8 weeks of period over or 24 weeks period over. So if you spend the money, go ahead and apply it and get it done with it. The next one is, can I keep my EID grant and PPP? And the answer is no, you cannot keep the both. They will reduce the grant from the PPP loan. So,
So Mahesh Bhai, a question did come up when you mentioned about the EIDL grant, which was a 10K grant based on 10 employees.
Mm-hmm.
So is that separate from the PPP is a question again. So you want to reiterate that point again?
Yeah, so here we have seen that some people who applied for EIDL and they never heard from the government and they never got the money. Then they applied for PPP, and then the government later on sent you they approved the PPP, they sent you the PPP money, and then all of a sudden you see in your bank statement that, oh, there is a $1,000 times the number of employee. You also have a maximum $10,000 of EIDL grant that came in. So now you feel happy for the moment, but then the government announced that, hey, this is a grant that you don't have to pay it back. And then they integrated this EIDL grant with the PPP loan. So there is no double dipping, in a sense that if you got the grant and if you got the the PPP forgiveness amount is going to be reduced by the EIDL grant. So you may have to pay some portion of the PPP loan, because not that it is not forgiven, it is forgiven, but you also got the money of EIDL grant. So essentially it is one or the other, the whichever is higher, that will be forgiven, just to put it simply. So EIDL grant was given to you, and that is a part of the PPP, and that's how it is going to be worked. Is that good enough, Swapan?
Yes, that's good enough.
Okay, so next, let's go to the next one. Okay, so now the main issue is this, the government gave you the money for 8 weeks or 10 weeks, whatever it lasted you. Now you still have a virus going on, virus has not gone away. The cities are opening and closing, and businesses are opening and closing. Bars were open in Houston until the day before yesterday, then they were told to shut down. So this issue is going to impact the viability and the survivability of the business. And the government knows that. However, government cannot keep on sending the money to you or to the businesses for indefinite period of time. So they realize that and they said that, okay, let's come up with a lending program, because the banks are going to be reluctant to give the money because of the viability and the virus and all those things. So the bank said that, okay, let's start with the Main Street lending program, and I will go over with very shortly the basic program, basic in nutshell, because the program is still being set up with the banks. The banks and the Federal Reserve is encouraging the banks to participate as a lender into this program, and hopefully soon it will be done, and then you should be able to get some money. However, the key points are as under. It is going to be a loan and not forgiven. So it's not like a free money. You have to pay it back. I want to make it clear. You have to pay it back. The loan term is for 5 years. You can get as low as 250,000 to as much as 300 million. The principal payment will be deferred for 2 years. The interest payment will be deferred for 1 year. So you will start paying the interest from the date the loan is given to you. However, you don't have to pay the interest for 1 year, and you don't have to pay the principal for 2 years, and then you pay it back in 5 years. The interest rate will be floating between 3.5% to 4%. There is no prepayment penalty. If your business picks up after the virus is gone and you want to go ahead and pay, they will not charge you any penalty. And then the last two important point is that any employer who has less than 15,000 employees and the 2019 revenue was $5 billion or less will qualify. However, they must have a minimum earning of 250,000 before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. So they are looking at 250,000 of EBITDA, because my guess is that they may want to come up with a securitization of this loan and then sell it in the secondary market, or the government may keep it on the books. But this is going to put a life into the business that has a greater probability of surviving, and they won't be cut off, or they won't have to lay off the employee because of the funding. And the funding may be harder to come by from the bank. So government came out with this program. Keep an eye, if you are an employer who can think that who thinks that this is going to be a good program, then they can take advantage of it. It should be up and running probably in less than, I would say, 10 to 15 days. And so with that, I think my formal presentation comes to an end, and I will hand it back over to Swapan, and then Dimple will go on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahesh Bhai, so much. Thank you for covering almost all the aspects. There were a bunch of questions which are coming, and thank you, audience, for staying on with us. We are answering most of the questions as they come, but we'll be having separate towards the end of it. One more point which Mahesh Bhai did mention was about retention of records. Record keeping is a very, very important thing in this entire calculation, the 6 years. Do not forget the actual application, the form that you have filled while getting the PPP. That is an important document because that has gone to the IRS, to the SBA, of course, and you have signed it under the perjury instructions. There are a lot of data in that which you said at that point of time during the COVID crisis. Yes, 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 whatever, and you signed it off. But those are documents which you need to be aware of, read them correctly. One question which always comes up is there, which was important at that point of time, was the employee's principal place of residence has to be US. So keep that in mind as well, because we have seen some areas in which there is some issues which will be foreseeable in the future as well. With that, I will be moving on to the next speaker, of course, and she is going to be Rimpal Mashruwala. Rimpal has been around for the last 10 plus years in public practice as well. And she has been a great supporter of the chamber. She has been on all our tax seminars as well since 2011. She is actually the sponsor for today's afternoon's webinar as well. Thank you so much, Rimpal, about that. And she is involved with various other temples and organizations in Houston as well. Rimpal, you can get started with your presentation. I will interject if there are some questions which are relevant at that point of time. Otherwise, you can continue with your presentation.
Thank you, Swapan. Thank you for letting me speak. Thank you, Chamber, for giving me this opportunity. Thank you, Jagdeep ji, Tarush ji, and Bhavna for putting this together. And I'm just fortunate here to be working with Swapan and the Chamber since last few years and helping our communities out in tough times. So today, I think with that regards, we are presenting the PPP forgiveness rules and how that works in actual situation. So I think Mahesh did quite good job on putting the overall scenario together, and I'm going to cover in some of the in-depth items that that will be needed while you prepare your application. So before I go to my presentation, I just wanted to give you a quick update. Today is the last day to apply for the PPP. There is 134 billion still left in the pot. So if you are still thinking, please submit your application by midnight tonight and you should be in. Government gave 520 billion in loans under this program, and average size of the loan was 110K, which was down from 206K in round one. So we are seeing some of the smaller loans now. SBA expected to release names of PPP loan recipient this week. So that's something new that we learned, that they will be releasing names and other data for the businesses for whom PPP loan was given above $150,000. And lastly, with the passing of Flexibility Act on June 5th, there are some new rules, new changes, and certain other things that we wanted to cover in today's presentation. So Bhavna, if you can do the first slide. Yeah, so when to apply? When to apply for the forgiveness, I think Mahesh Bhai mentioned it can be submitted as soon as your 8 weeks are over, or with the new covered period as soon as the 24 weeks are over. We would suggest to apply as soon as possible because you don't want things hanging around at the end of the year if you wait too long. Which could affect your current year's taxes and of course next year's taxes as well. So if you are used up the funds, please apply once your covered period is over, or before that in case if you have used up your funds.
Rimpal, sorry for interrupting. This is Jagdeep.
Sure.
I just want to let the viewers know that on your view option, you have the option of viewing it side by side. Because if you do not use that option, the slides will be covered by the photo strip of our pictures. So to be able to see the slides properly, if you go to view options and there you click on the side-by-side option or the side-by-side mode, you will be able to see the slide and the speaker. Sorry for the interruption, but I thought it was important to be able to see the slides properly.
No problem, Jagdeep. So I will continue with my presentation. So if you've received your loan prior to June 5th, the passage of PPP Flexibility Act, you may elect to use 8 weeks of covered period provided by the CARES Act, or 24 weeks of covered period if you have received your loan after June 5th. Presumably you would do this, you would only select 8 weeks of cover period if three things. If you've spent all your PPP loan during the 8-week window, did not reduce any salary or headcount during the 8-week period, or are eager to move on from the PPP process and never speak of it again. So in that case, I think 8-week would be a better option for you. I would still suggest you go and check out with your CPA, consult with these professionals to see what would be better, because we have seen that not all businesses will benefit from the extended 24-week of covered period timeframe as allowed. Next slide, please. So regarding the timeline of the forgiveness, June 30th, today is the last day of the PPP. 24 weeks is the new covered period. We have 10 months to apply for the forgiveness from the end of the 24 weeks of covered period. So if you're choosing 24 weeks, you have 10 months at the max to apply for the forgiveness. If you do not apply within this 10 months, then your loan starts and you will start paying the principal and interest on the loan. 60 days for your lender to review your forgiveness application and come back to you. And once they have reviewed, they'll submit it to SBA, and SBA has 90 days to review and approve your final forgiveness application. Just keep in mind, SBA has the final rule, and they have the final say on your forgiveness application. So until that is done, you don't know whether your loan is forgiven or not. So
Rimple,
that is.
Rimple,
Yes?
there was a question which was related to this.
Yes.
If SBA reduces the forgiveness, is there an appeal process for that?
I am not sure about that yet, but I heard that there is an appeal process to it.
Yes, the guidance
So
is coming
yes.
through with that, but there
Right.
is an appeal process. Keep that in mind. Everything is based on documentation. As long as you are able to justify the documentation which you missed to provide in the first application, you can still be able to do that. But that answers the question.
Yes, yeah, documentation is the key. Keep all your records straight so that when you go up for the appeals or any kind of forgiveness process, it can be forgiven easily and with less of issues. Next slide, please. Next slide, please, Bhavna.
So a related question came up.
Yes.
For 24 weeks, do you have to apply for that separately? It's a safe harbor, so it's a no answer. Correct?
Yes. So after June 5th, I think you, if you got your loan approved before June 5th, you have two options: 8 weeks or 24 weeks. If it is after, you have 24 weeks, and you just let your lender know what you are doing. When you are submitting your application, either it will be based on the 8 weeks or 24 weeks. I think lender will have their say on, how they're accepting this. And I've not seen any lender starting their forgiveness application yet. So we will see how that plays out. So there are three ways in which I think I have a previous slide, Bhavna. Did we cover that? Yes. Okay, next. Okay, so there are three ways in which you can get a haircut. I say haircut because your forgiveness amount could be slashed. Mahesh Bhai mentioned if the three ways are if you reduce your headcount, if you reduce your employees' salaries and wages, or if you do not spend at least 60% of the loan proceeds on the payroll cost. Next slide, please. So I've came up with an example that I wanted to go over with our listeners so that it is clear in a real life situation. So let's take an example of a fitness center with 25 employees. 2019 payroll was 750,000 for them, and 57,692 is per month payroll cost. 2.5 times per month payroll cost is what they were allowed to borrow, and so they borrowed $144,230 in PPP loan amount. None of the employees, assume none of the employees' wages was over $100,000, and after the COVID came in, they had to reduce their headcount, and now they only have 20 employees, and they laid off the remaining 5 employees. Next slide. Center had the following other expenses during the 8-week period: rent 25,000, utilities 7,000, salary for those 20 remaining employees 90,000, and interest on equipment, which is $6,000. So in all, they spent 128,000 of the loan amount in the eligible forgivable cost. Next slide, please. However, he further needs to reduce his forgiveness calculation by the FTE reduction. Because they reduced the headcount, they've reduced the count of the full-time equivalent employee from 25 to 20, and thus they have to go through this calculation whereby their 80% of their forgiveness cost is kept, and 20% is reduced because of the reduction in the workforce. So if you divide their current period employee by their number of employees in the pre-COVID world and multiply with the total forgivable amount, you get 102,400, which is the maximum they could forgive out of their loan amount. Next slide, please. So his forgiveness amount will be lesser of the 3. So the 3 criteria as a loan amount, which is 144,230, reduction in the full-time equivalent employee, which we saw the calculation, it's 102,400, or the 60% rule, basically, which says that at least 60% of the proceeds has to be spent on the payroll amount. So you get that by dividing your payroll divide by 0.60. So you get 150,000, and the lesser of this 3 will become the forgivable loan amount out of the total loan. Next slide.
Good illustration, Rimple. The numbers are getting boggling down. So a quick question based on that. There was a question for salary based. So if I pay my employee on a salary base, does the number of hours matter for FTE purpose? And the second related question related to the same thing is, employee's salary was 138K per annum. Her salary got reduced to 110K because of COVID. Hope this doesn't affect the forgiveness since the 100K cap is there.
Yes, one of my future slide will have that. The employees over 100,000 will not be counted in the reduction in pay calculation because they were paid over 100,000. So that is exempt. But you still have, if there is a reduction in headcount, you still have to go through the FTE calculation. And yes, the earlier answer was yes. You have to go through these calculations to determine what is forgivable. And yes, please keep hours of the salaried employees as well.
And the same thing related to Rimple, same thing related is, if there was 60% was only spent towards payroll, will the entire amount of PPP will be forgiven, or only 60%?
No,
and
so
do
that
you have
was
to spend?
yeah.
So
Go ahead.
Can you explain that?
Yes, so no, that was initially, by looking at just the formula, it seems that you have to either spend 60% of the entire amount, and if you don't, let's say if you spend 59%, your entire loan amount will be due and nothing will be forgiven. But that is not the case. This is a sliding method. So if you don't spend entire 60%, you still have to go through the calculation, and your forgiveness amount will be reduced proratably, but not the entire amount. So yeah, that is good thing that the SBA clarified in one of the frequently asked questions. So continuing with the example, I wanted to give this example to be able for our listeners to know that if you make changes in the headcounts, things can drastically affect your forgiveness calculation. So in this case, if let's say after the lockdown has been lifted and the businesses are opening slowly, owner decides to add 2 more employees at an additional cost of 30,000 in salaries and wages for those 8 weeks of covered period. Now the total allowable expenses would be 128,000 plus the 30,000, so 158,000. Next slide, please. So now the new reduction for FTE employee headcount will be 22 over 25 times 158,000. So the new reduction, the forgiveness reduction amount loan will be 139,000. So now you see, right, the 30,000 in additional cost resulted him in 139,000 in loan forgiveness. So that's additional 6,640 by adding 2 employees at $30,000. He got an extra 36,640 in forgiveness, loan forgiveness. So this is kind of important. People, when businesses have increases and decreases in number of employees, we would highly recommend it to calculate so that you are aware, how much of your loan will be forgiven or not. Next slide, please. So FTE reductions can be costly. As I said in previous example, FTE reductions can be costly if FTE headcounts and pay is not fully restored either by earlier of December 31st or the application date. So please be mindful when you apply for the forgiveness. You have to restore your headcounts and pay by the application date or the December 31st, 2020. So please calculate because this can result in different amount of forgiveness calculation in different situation. So please calculate again and again, and that's my advice. Next slide, please. So I would also like to cover some of the compensation limits that was changed in this Flexibility Act. And so previously we are aware that we were all limited to 100,000 and 8 weeks of 100,000 pay basically resulted in a simple math, 15,385. The Flexibility Act increased it to 100,000 and it is basically 24 weeks of payroll, which is 46,154. But owners are not part of this calculation, so just be careful. These are just for employees. PPP loan was based on around 11 weeks of payroll, but the forgiveness now for most of us is for 24 weeks. So most borrowers should be okay. They will not have to worry about the forgiveness calculation. It is only the people who are walking on thin line or playing around with different things that could jeopardize their forgiveness. But otherwise, most self-employed people, individuals should be okay with the 24 weeks of covered period. Next slide, please. So I have here the owner compensation limits, which are separate from the employees limits. Previously,
Dimple, before you move on to
yes.
that, again, a question which has come up was, when do the SBA 90-day time limits start?
I think it starts from the time the lender submits their package to SBA for approval. Because they have 90 days from the time they received the application for forgiveness.
Good. Thank you.
So owner compensation is previously was limited to 15,384, which was based on the 8 weeks of payroll. And now with the Flexibility Act, they have increased it to 20,833, which is, that's the cap on the owner. It is not 24 divided by 12, but it's actually 2.5 times the 100,000. So 2.5 months times the 100,000 annual compensation limit. So that this is the cap for self-employed people and owner employee. Again, we're waiting for SBA to define who is the owner employee. So there are certain things that we are waiting for SBA to clarify, but for now we know that it is limited to 20,833. Again, this is another good interesting point to think about. If you're working on your 2019 tax return now and have a PPP loan based on the 2019 data, please make sure you revisit those numbers with your tax professionals, because it could impact your PPP forgiveness. So make sure you do that, go through that calculation. Next slide, please. Owner employees health insurance and retirement plan. So many of us are asking the same question: health insurance and retirement plan for owners, whether they are covered or not covered. So here is the answer to that. Employer health insurance contributions are not included for self-employed individuals, general partners, or owner employee of an S corporation. However, for retirement plan, employer contributions made on behalf of self-employed individuals or general partners are not included, but for S corporation retirement plan are included, but it is capped. It is capped to that 100,000 limit. So my next slide will have a table that shows exactly what this means. Next slide, please. So here is the table which shows for whom owner employees for health insurance and retirement plan, whether they're deductible or whether they're counted against the forgiveness or not. So for self-employed, no. For general partner, no health insurance, no retirement. S Corp owner employee, no for health insurance, but as I said previously, retirement plan contribution is included, but it is capped at the 100,000 level. And again, C corporation owner employee can include both health insurance and retirement plan, provided the cap applies. Next slide, please. Payroll cost incurred or paid. So many of us has questions. So I think SBA clarified that. Earlier they had mentioned that payroll cost incurred and paid, but now they have clarified that either it could be incurred or paid, meaning payroll costs are considered paid on the day that paychecks are distributed or the borrower initiates an ACH credit transaction. You can count that as towards your PPP forgiveness. Payroll cost. Yes, Swapan?
Simple, a related question to that. What if the owner has only one employee, and if it's a S corporation who the owner draws the salary, will that be considered for PPP forgiveness?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it will be considered for PPP forgiveness, but you go through the owner employees cap and the other calculation. It will be capped at 100,000, but it will be included. Payroll costs are considered incurred on the day that employees' pay is earned. So earlier we saw the definition of paid. Second, we saw the definition of incurred. So either you can use either one of these two mechanisms to calculate your payroll cost for the covered 8 or 24 weeks period. Payroll cost incurred but not paid during the last pay period of the selected period are eligible for forgiveness if paid on or before the next regular pay date. So for example, today is June 30th. Let's assume my 8 weeks period ended today, and I still have employees to be paid because the pay period has not ended for them until next payroll date. So I am actually, even if my 8 weeks are over today, I can include the payroll that I'm paying them next week if it is paid on a regular pay cycle. So that's something that SBA clarified recently, and that was very helpful. There was a lot of confusion around this in the industry. Next slide, please. Now, there are certain loan audit regulations that we, I think Swapanji emphasized, Maheshji emphasized. Record keeping is a big thing. SBA could audit and place an inquiry anytime on any loan. So plus lender can also have their own requirements. There is there is a SBA appeal requirements as well if you find something is not right in your forgiveness calculation. The statute of limitation that Mahesh Bhai said 6 years from. So I just wanted to add to what he has said earlier, that you have to keep your records for 6 years. But let's say let's assume that you took the PPP forgiveness and not 100% was forgiven. You still have some loan that you will be paying principal and interest on. Let's say your loan terms are 5 years and you continue with your loan for 5 more years. So now in this situation, not only you have to keep your records for the 5 years for loan terms, plus the statute of limitation does not start until the end of the very last payment for the loan. So basically 5 years for the loan plus 6 years for statute of limitations. So you could end up keeping your records for 11 years. Think about it. So just make sure when you're making a decision of paying off or forgiven, keep everything in mind, because I would just say that
So,
if you
Rimple,
owe, yes,
there is a related question to that.
sure, go ahead.
Can payroll cost and other expenses incurred prior to the loan disbursement date be included for forgiveness?
No, prior to loan disbursement date is not. It starts from either the loan disbursement date or the alternate covered payroll period, which I believe starts after you get the loan.
Disbursement of the loan.
Yes.
And the related another question is, if we pay bi-weekly out of the PPP funds and we use them up in 9 or 10 weeks, do we have the option for 24 weeks? And we should apply it maybe after 10 weeks or so? Is that
you can
right
apply,
understanding?
yes, you can apply as soon as you run out of the funds. But with a lot of things going on with SBA releasing new information, I would say don't not rush for it. But I don't know, even banks have started taking on the applications yet, so even they are not ready. We will find out, the rush that had during the application process. I think there is no mechanism in place right now to take the application forgiveness application process. We'll have to wait and see what lenders come up with, what SBA comes up with. So until then, I would suggest you wait, but sooner you do it, better it is. Don't wait until end of the year or until next year to do your forgiveness application.
So earlier you mentioned about something related to oversight and keeping records proper and audits. So I do hear that the SBA does have the Inspector General on the task force. There is the Treasury CID, and we did see a couple of cases which were recently kind of blown out, and in which there were cases that people had forged some documents regarding the payroll applications and everything, and they used up the funds, and how they are facing the consequences of that. So based on that, your tip about keeping records and keeping it straight, because we are living in a great country, of course, we need to be compliant. This is money which is free come out, but make sure that you stay in compliance. We do not want a stigma for our businesses based on a wrongdoing.
Right. I would not want to see any of my client in an orange jumpsuit, Swapan. So I would definitely, help them or make them keep all the records and make sure they have all the records when they go apply for forgiveness. Next slide, please. Yeah, so these are some of the things that, to add to what Swapan has already mentioned, the SBA has authority to basically audit any loan, any size loan. And they're actually training the Criminal Information Department, IRS's Criminal Information Department, and other agents to carry out the PPP audits. So we will see some audits in future, and we will see some compliance related issues. So sooner you keep track of all your records, better it is. Next slide, please. So what will be audited? So there are three things that SBA could audit in your application. First, have you calculated the loan amount correctly? I know we also saw the rush of application, and people were just left and right submitting their application to the bank so that they can get through the first round or second round of the program. But they will they have emphasized that they will audit if the loan amount was calculated correctly to begin with. Secondly, they can they can audit whether you have used the loan proceeds for the allowable uses as specified in the CARES Act. Basically, the payroll protection program meant for payroll, so they will check your payroll records, 941 records, whether the leases are in place before the magic February 15th date, all your utility bills. So keep track of all your documentations. And thirdly, the entitled, whether you are entitled to loan forgiveness in the amount claimed on the application itself. So those are the three pieces of information that could be audited. Next slide, please. And yes, so I will just mention that any size loan of any size can be audited. Next slide.
So related question, Rimple, someone
Yes.
did mention about what is being done by the SBA about disclosures. So basically, there is something to that anyone recipients who are greater than 150K, that list has been published or something. Can you explain that?
Yes, I think I mentioned earlier. They are going to release the names of the borrower who have applied for greater than 150,000 in loan, and then they are going to do it this week or next week. And there are certain things that they will release. They'll release the name, the NAICS code, and certain other things that will be made public, but not loan amount below 150,000 will not be made public. And yes, so lastly, I wanted to just talk to everyone about the deduction of the expenses. IRS in their notice 2032 issue, which was issued on April 30th, stated that expenses that were paid using the forgivable amount will not be deductible against your regular income. So be mindful, and if you need to pay your estimated taxes, please pay by July 15th. And consider all the things, consider talking to your tax professionals for the implications of the forgiveness down the road. So, and now, of course, there's the HEROES Act, which proposes to restore the ability of borrowers to deduct expenses and not recognize income, but it has not happened yet. And we don't know when will that pass or if it will pass in future. I think Swapan, we can conclude this. Do you want to continue?
Yes. Thank you, Rimple, so much for covering. Jagdeep ji, we might be running about 7 to 8 minutes over the time that we have been allocated, because we have got a host of questions and a lot of audience has been putting up a bunch of questions out over there, which I tried our best to cover. Mahesh bhai, there are a couple of questions that you can be able to answer as well. Because this is, again, because some people might have joined a little later, because this is being live streamed from our Facebook and with our partners as well. So based on that, the questions are coming up again. Can you explain the 10K grant which is there and how that will work? And can you discuss a little bit about the EIDL process as well?
Yes, so so 10K grant was given based on the number of employee, $1,000 per employee, and if you had 10 employee, you got 10,000. So that grant was integrated with PPP loans, and whether you received the grant first or PPP loan first, it is immaterial. But when you calculate, this is how it is going to work, and I'll simplify it. So let's say you got a $50,000 of PPP loan, and you had 10 employees, so you got $10,000 of grant. Now let's assume that you spend the 60% on the payroll and you spend 40% on the utility, and the full $50,000 is going to be forgiven. But out of that, they will say that, hey, you already got 10,000. So we are going to forgive 50,000, but minus 10,000 that you already got. So you have to give that 40,000 back to the government. That is what right now they are saying. I don't think there is any discussion about forgiving the grant and forgiving the PPP. So just be prepared for returning that EIDL, the money that you got. You are mute, Swapan.
Yeah, he's mute. Let me nature.
Sorry about that. Okay, can you just again clarify a little bit more on the 8-week rule and the 24-week rule? What needs to be done and need not be done?
So 8-week time was the initial time that they stipulated in which you have to spend the money on the payroll and on the utility. However, because of the conditions prevailing and business not being able to reopen, the government granted an extension of 24 weeks. So now you have a 24 weeks to use that PPP money for payroll and for the utility. So utility will be counted for next 24 weeks, and the payroll that you spend money in next 24, not next 24, I mean to say from the date you got the money, that is how it is going to work. So essentially you have a longer time period to pay the employees. So if you are shut down because you got the money, but you could not open the restaurant or bar and you could not pay your employee, then you have a time now to call the employee back, pay them, and those money will be counted as a forgiven money.
Okay, any one of you, can we increase the salary of any employee during the 8-week period that we are going to go with to use up the loan amount if there is a shortfall needed?
Yes, it is absolutely allowed.
And what is the 3508 easy? Where is that form to be sent?
You send the form to the lenders. Lender is your primary contact. The lender gave you the money. Right now, the lender is on the hook. When the lender, when the amount is forgiven, the SBA will give the money to the lender. And so lender is your primary point of contact.
How can an individual contractor apply for the PPP when they have no employees? Today is the last date. Can you just give a quick, brief overview, Rimple? How do they apply today?
Can you say that again? What was the question? How do they apply?
How can an individual contractor apply for PPP when they have no employees?
You have to take your 2019 self-employed income, which is, I'm assuming, Schedule C, line 31, and you do the application with the lender and give them the necessary documents like your copy of 2019 tax return, etc., to prove your income, and based on that you'll get the loan.
Mahesh bhai, the SBI EIDL starts after 1 year. And so if the interest which is being charged, if it is paid off before the start of the first year, will the interest be charged?
Well, the interest is deferred until the time the loan is not due. So once the forgiveness result comes, and then if you have a amount that to be repaid, then there is a interest calculation. So the interest will be calculated from the day the forgiveness is disapproved or reduced, and then you have a 1-year time period to start resuming the payment. So yes, interest also you can defer along with the loan payment.
Okay, so I think so we have answered most of the questions. It has been a great afternoon interacting with almost the great experts out over here. We have had a very, very challenging COVID situation, and all the CPAs, tax preparers, and experts have put their lot of time in there to help assess their clients, and of course the community at large with their expertise. The only thing, fast wrap up, a quick 1 minute, anything from you, Mahesh bhai, and with Rimple, can you want to end it up?
Yeah, well, go ahead, Mahesh bhai.
Yeah, I would say take this process seriously, because if you make a mistake and if you don't have records or if you just neglect it, then it's going to cost you personally, I mean financially. That's number one. If you are not accurate and if you don't do it properly, then you have to go through back and forth between the bank, and it's just going to cause a more frustration. And the business situations may be good, may not be good. So you want to avoid your frustration and hassles and aggravations. So just do the thing in a right way from the day one. That's all my advice is.
And I would like to add that SBA could criminally charge, anyone who is, you know, playing the forgiveness application or playing with the original application. So you could be charged civilly and criminally by the government. So please, please, please take it seriously.
So with that, we will be wrapping up. I would like to say this particular webinar is being recorded, and the chamber will be putting it up on our chamber website, and also will be sent out to the people who have registered for this attendees webinar this afternoon. And thank you so much for your time in spite of this busy season and July 15 deadline, which is coming up. Thanks, Rimple, for sponsoring. Thanks, Mahesh Bhai, for being there. And with that, to you, Jagdeep ji.
Thank you very much, Swapanji. Again, on behalf of Tarush Anand, the chairman of our board members, and our members, I want to thank the three panelists for making the time, because as Swapanji said, for a CPA, this is busy time. They have these July 15 deadlines that they need to meet, but they still make the time, because it's not just the hour and 15 minutes they are spending online with us. A lot of prep goes into this. And I want to acknowledge and thank Bhavna Kalyan with the chamber, who puts in a lot of effort to make these webinars run smoothly. I want to thank Rimple ji for sponsoring today's event, and Swapanji and Mahesh ji for having sponsored previous events. These are very meaningful events for the community at large. I do want to repeat my disclaimer on behalf of the chamber. All the information provided is for informational purpose only. Strongly recommend the way if you need an orthopedic surgery, you don't try to do it yourself. You a professional. Similarly, for this forgiveness program or for any financial needs, go to your existing CPA. If you do not have a CPA, these three CPAs are willing and available to take on new clients. We will be sharing their contact details in the final PowerPoint that we share. Again, we want to thank Rimple ji for sponsoring today's event. We would like to thank our sister organizations. If Bhavna, could you bring up the slide of our partner organizations who support our efforts to get the message out to the community. I want to especially thank Seva International, which has on a regular basis been streaming this out to their database. We invite the other sister organizations to reach out to Bhavna at the chamber if you want to live stream our event through your portals. Our next major event is being finalized for July 22nd. It is by a very prominent expert in Indo-US relations, Dhruv Jaishankar, who was a speaker at a conference in Houston when we first met him. He will be talking about the changes in the Indo-US relationship. We are finalizing the flyer. This is an event which we will be co-hosting with the Greater Houston Partnership, and it's in the morning of July the 22nd. So the event will be going on our website by the end of this week. I encourage all our attendees to visit isccgh.com to keep track of the webinars we are hosting. We will be sending out the recordings for all our previous webinars so that anybody interested can click onto the links provided to look at the webinars that they may have missed, because each one of them is valuable. With that, I want to thank all the participants who joined us today. I want to thank the media partners who helped get the word out by offering us time pro bono on their radio programs, for putting us on their television shows or in their print media. With that, once again, on behalf of the Indo-American Chamber of Commerce, I invite you to send us your comments to info@isccgh.com or jagdeep@isccgh.com. If you want to talk to us about membership, about sponsorship, you can call me on my cell phone, which is 832-746-8372. We want to keep working with the community, with our partners, to ensure that in these uncertain times, we create a sense of balance, and we leverage our 21 years of relationships and resources for the benefit of the community. And when I say the community, I mean the community at large, because we are an inclusive chamber. We continue to partner with our sister organizations across town. And if you go through our list of webinars, you will realize what I'm talking about. With that, I want to thank all of you for participating. I want to thank the three panelists for a wonderful, informative webinar. And on behalf of Tarush Anand, the chairman of our board, and the rest of our board, I want to thank all of you for logging in today. With this, I wish you all to stay safe. Remember the 6-foot distance. Remember to mask up. Avoid as much travel as possible, because we've got to bring this pandemic under control to ensure that we bring back our community and our economy to the healthy one we had in the months of January and February. With that, I'll fold my hands the Indian way and say namaskar, which is now becoming a global way of greeting each other when we meet or when we leave each other. With that, this program comes to an end. Thank you very much.
Thank you.